For the final 14 years of her life, Doris Day's sole grandson claims he was denied the opportunity to see the Hollywood icon. Ryan Melcher sent these adorable childhood pictures of himself with his grandmother. She was the voice of hit songs, the smiling face in Technicolor musicals, the golden girl of Hollywood, and the epitome of pure perfection. When the curtain comes down and everyone stops looking, what will happen? A decades-long quiet is now being broken by Doris Day's sole grandson, who is exposing a hidden reality that is very different from the glitter. His revelations complicate her legacy but do not change it. Something important was kept out of the spotlight, whether it was through silent gates, unanswered phone calls, legacy foundations, or family members who never said farewell. And at last, the one individual she never brought up in interviews is prepared to say what was not said. And why? The grandchild stopped talking. Ryan Melcher, Doris Day's only grandchild, was totally absent from her close circle in the years preceding her passing. By circumstance, not by choice. Ryan was not involved in the Hollywood icon's last years, estate planning, or even public farewell, even though he was a direct descendant of her. There was no final farewell, no family get-together, and no heartfelt letter from grandmother to grandson when she died in 2019. The woman who sang about connection and love left behind a broken legacy that excluded her lone surviving heir from both her last moments and the institutions she established for her legacy. This exclusion was symbolic as well as emotional. Ryan, who was descended from her and had the Melcher name, was also excluded from the Doris Day Animal Foundation, which she had worked tirelessly to establish over many years. He later claimed that Bob Bashara, her long-standing business manager, had changed the foundation's objective and leadership by replacing Day's original visionaries with loyalists. The world kept honoring his grandmother's legacy as Ryan observed from the outside. He continued to be an unwelcome, unheard, and unseen live reminder of an unfinished story. Given that Ryan and Doris were once together, especially when he was a toddler, the estrangement is extremely painful. Following the actor's parents' 1997 divorce, Doris attempted to get in touch with Ryan following the death of his father, Terry Melcher, in 2004, which could have led to a therapeutic reunion, but it never materialized. It was a chance for emotional and generational closure that was lost. Ryan, among other things, came to stand for all that remained unsolved, those familial ties that were lost to time, celebrity, and, all too frequently, the barriers erected to keep public individuals safe. Ryan Melcher, who is now raising a child, thinks about both the family he came from and the one he is creating. The grandmother's legacy is not diminished by her absence from his mature life. It just makes it more difficult. Doris Day, a loving and charming woman who was ultimately isolated by distance and silence from a grandchild who watched it all from behind a closed gate, provided a sickly sweet juxtaposition with her somber public persona. However, not everyone shared Ryan's story when he finally spoke. Contradictory reports. The narrative rapidly became more complex as Ryan Melcher made the heartbreaking admission that he was no longer in contact with his grandma, Doris Day. Charlie Cullen Walters, Day's longtime publicist, publicly refuted some of Ryan's assertions. A direct invitation to a special celebration for Doris' 90th birthday in 2014 was one of several attempts, according to Walters, to re-establish Ryan's relationship with her. Walters claims that although Ryan never replied, the invitation might have offered a chance for the family to get back together, indicating that the estrangement might not have been caused only by Doris or her inner group. Walters also pointed out a notice on Ryan's own real estate website that, at one point, advised customers not to get in touch with him for celebrity or Hollywood-related issues, which further raised questions about Ryan's story. This made the issue even more unclear, suggesting that Ryan would have wanted to officially, at least, disassociate himself from his well-known ancestry. This casts doubt on the notion that he had been completely amenable to reconciliation, even while it doesn't lessen his anguish or the agony of being held apart. But for Ryan, it has been a manager-take-all situation. Furthermore, he said that Bob Bashara, Doris's manager, was mostly responsible for enforcing the estrangement. Who remained in charge of her life as he aged? Ryan claimed that Bashara reorganized Doris' animal organization, replacing long-standing board members with members of his own family, and prevented the scheduled dinner reunion with her following the death of his father. Ryan claims that this makes it nearly impossible to have a genuine, spontaneous reunion with his grandmother because it clearly demonstrates gatekeeping and control. Although it is impossible to deny the existence of both physical and emotional barriers, Doris made certain attempts that appeared to have been overlooked or disregarded. The conflicting accounts from Ryan and Doris's representatives demonstrate how easily miscommunication, celebrity, and loss can muddy familial ties. There is little doubt that the tight relationship that existed between the grandma and her grandchild was never restored. And the hidden weight of what may have been fell on both of them. Doris Day's lonely last years. Doris Day made the decision to virtually avoid the limelight that had once made her a household figure in the last decades of her life. She found serenity among her cherished animals on her 11-acre ranch in the Carmel Valley, California, where she established a calm, solitary lifestyle. Known for having a great deal of empathy for all animals, Doris reportedly looked for up to 30 dogs at once, giving each one a room of its own and even setting up a special kitchen for their meals. Her life was influenced by her strong bond with animals, and her ranch turned into a sanctuary where she could live freely from the demands of Hollywood. Peace was not the only reason for Doris' withdrawal from public life. A drive for simplicity was another characteristic. Many of the formalities that are usually associated with celebrities of her caliber were absent from her life. She kept a washing machine in her bedroom, served food on paper plates, and frequently turned down public honors, such as the coveted Kennedy Center honors, because she didn't like being on the road or at big gatherings, according to people who knew her in Carmel. In 1989, she made her last public appearance at the Golden Globes. In 1994, she was last known to have been on television. She became essentially invisible to the public from the middle of the 1990s onward, choosing the security of her house over the limelight. Although many admired Doris, others viewed her decision to live her life independently with concern, especially those family members and devoted followers who were troubled by her seclusion. Her grandson Ryan Melcher later claimed that it was practically difficult to see or speak with her because of the fences, gates, and even security guards that surrounded her Carmel estate. Ryan believed that Doris's emotional isolation in the last years of her life was mostly maintained by these obstacles and the increasingly controlling control that her manager, Bob Bashara, imposed. For Doris's friends, the estate held great significance. They saw it as a larger barrier that had developed between Doris and everyone who was closest to her. Doris Day continued to work through her Doris Day Animal Foundation, which Bashara took over after her retirement, despite the quiet and seclusion of her final years. Her priorities shifted from stardom to advocacy, with an emphasis on animal welfare issues. Her 97th birthday videogram in 2019 was her final public letter, in which she thanked her fans and urged them to continue the foundation's work. Even though she had long stopped participating in public amateur activities, Doris Day's quiet last years represented a woman who had endured a lot and had made the decision to spend time with her animals, who had provided her with the most comfort. Following one of the most painful betrayals behind the scenes, Doris Day, once hailed as America's sweetheart for her dazzling on-screen presence and wholesome persona, became a woman betrayed. For almost 20 years, her third husband, Martin Melcher, who was also her manager, and lawyer Jerome Rosenthal embezzled and plundered her money. Doris learned that her whole $150 million wealth had disappeared by the time of Melcher's untimely death in 1968, leaving her with over $500,000 in debt. She had never questioned Melcher's financial management because she had complete faith in him. It wasn't only a monetary loss. It destroyed her trust and sense of security. There was more to the treachery than money. Following Melcher's passing, Doris discovered that he had surreptitiously enrolled her in the Doris Day Show television series without getting her permission or knowledge. After completing her last movie in 1968, she had long intended to stop acting, but suddenly she was legally required to star in a project she had never accepted. Even worse, CBS had already spent the $500,000 advance. Doris was compelled to return to work as she had no financial safety net and no time to mourn. The fact that the husband she believed to be protecting her had lied to her in the worst way made the arduous demand even more agonizing. Emotional trauma examples. However, Doris had to fulfill the contract. From 1968 to 1973, the Doris Day Show was in operation. Additionally, a successful show was one in which she was already experiencing emotional and financial exhaustion. He filed a malpractice lawsuit against Jerome Rosenthal in 1969. She also obtained a $22 million settlement in the '74 following a legal battle. However, insurance settlements and payouts only accounted for a small portion of that. Not only was her money account harmed, but her trust in her loved ones was also damaged. Not only in their private life but also in public. In front of the world, Doris had to reconstruct her life after Melcher betrayed her. One of the most dramatic examples of celebrity mismanagement in Hollywood history is this sad chapter in Doris Day's life. Doris's life outside of the screen was tainted by heartbreaking suffering and manipulation in her personal life, despite the fact that her performances brought joy and light to millions of people. However, she remained loyal to herself and refused to let the betrayal define who she was. She discovered a purpose outside of Hollywood, where she lives in peace and raises issues related to animal welfare. The fact that she was able to stand by herself after such destruction shows how strong she really is behind the happy front. A reminder that pain may still affect icons. Health conflicts. Although Doris Day was beloved for her bright smile and upbeat on-screen image, few were aware that she spent a significant portion of her life fighting severe anxiety, depression, and panic attacks off-screen. Even while she filmed popular musicals and romantic comedies, she endured silent suffering during the 1950s, when she was at the height of her reputation, frequently due to emotional stress. Sometimes her difficulties were so bad that she thought she had heart disease, although the symptoms were actually signs of acute worry. Doris later acknowledged that instead of getting treatment, she tried to deal by drinking alcohol as a form of self-medication and avoiding social situations. The 1954 filming of Young at Heart, in which she co-starred with Frank Sinatra, is one of the most revealing examples of her mental health issues. On set, Doris started crying after a particularly intense sequence and required Sinatra's consolation. She subsequently disclosed that she felt as though she was about to have a total collapse. These malfunctions weren't unique. She had another severe panic attack while filming I'll See You in My Dreams in 1952, which led her to believe she was physically unwell. Despite these recurrent episodes, she didn't seek therapy until much later in life because mental health was stigmatized at the time. Doris didn't begin therapy until 1971, when she was nearly 50 years old. She collaborated with a therapist for the following 4 years to address the emotional suffering and long-suppressed trauma that had been concealed for so long. Later in life, she openly discussed the benefits it had on her, explaining how it gave her the sense of calm she had been lacking for so long. For a woman who had dedicated her career to hiding suffering behind a positive facade, it marked a sea change that millions mistakenly believed to be genuine bliss. Doris's life is a powerful reminder that emotional suffering can still occur despite celebrity. Doris battled her own personal issues while breaking box office records and rising to fame as one of the most well-liked celebrities in American entertainment history. She eventually turned to therapy in order to regain emotional balance, but this came at the expense of emphasizing the cost of maintaining the ideal public image. Doris Day demonstrated that even in the greatest light of Hollywood, vulnerability and courage can coexist by sharing her story later in life, speaking for countless others who suffer in silence. Her life was filled with risky connections, and behind the scenes, she fought her hardest struggles not only with herself but also with those closest to her. A string of extremely harmful relationships marred Doris Day's personal life, starting with her first marriage to trombonist Al Jordan in 1941 when she was just 17 years old. Doris thought the marriage would make her happy, even though her mother had warned her against it. Rather, it soon became violent. Jordan was furious on their wedding night when he witnessed Doris giving a coworker a thank-you kiss on the cheek. He badly beat her after dragging her through the streets and returning to their hotel. During their brief marriage, the abuse intensified, leading to a horrifying episode when Doris was 8 months pregnant. Jordan intended to kill himself, Doris, and their unborn child, and he concealed a loaded revolver in his vehicle. Doris barely avoided disaster by soothing him, but the trauma haunted her for the rest of her life. Doris attempted to save the marriage in 1942 after giving birth to her son, Terry Melcher, in the hopes that Jordan would change. But she had the guts to leave when he started acting aggressively toward their child. Regretfully, there was no respite from her second marriage to musician George Widler in 1946. Despite the initial promise of the relationship, Widler grew aloof and uneasy as Doris' career took off. Her fame was difficult for him. "I wanted to avoid being recognized as Mr. Doris Day." 8 months into their marriage, he filed for divorce, claiming he couldn't cope with her rising fame. This was the last straw. Doris was devastated and disillusioned once more by the sudden conclusion. In 1951, Doris married Martin Melcher for the third and longest time. She believed she had discovered her haven. Her managers were Jerome Rosenthal and her husband. Someone she could fully rely on to handle her financial and professional obligations. Her most painful betrayal, however, resulted from this confidence. Melcher mishandled and wasted her earnings to the tune of about $150 million during their 17-year marriage, with the assistance of his lawyer, Jerome Rosenthal. And Doris was deeply indebted by the time Melcher died in 1968. In addition to this financial deception, he made Doris labor despite her desire to retire by secretly committing her to his television show, The Doris Day Show. Doris Day had been portrayed throughout her life as the embodiment of joyful optimism. In actuality, her romantic history reveals a different tale of deceit, emotional abuse, and manipulation. Each relationship's wounds show themselves as severe emotional pain, financial ruin, and physical assault. Despite this history of abuse, Doris was able to get back on her feet and regain control of her life. She devoted all of her attention to being an animal champion and using therapy to heal. Her fortitude and ability to rediscover inner peace following such emotional destruction point to a fortification that goes beyond the on-screen persona. The passion for animals of Doris Day. After leaving Hollywood, Doris Day discovered a new calling in animal welfare, a cause that had always held special meaning for her. Growing up with a deep affection for animals, particularly following the untimely death of her childhood dog Tiny, Doris dedicated her life to helping and rescuing animals in need. She founded the Doris Day Pet Foundation in 1978, which eventually developed into a DAF's Doris Day Animal Foundation. What started off as a modest local initiative to save and rehome animals gradually expanded into a reputable nationwide organization dedicated to assisting animals via outreach, fundraising, and education. Doris was personally involved with the cause, not merely a brand ambassador. She refused to continue filming unless a feeding station was established for the local animals since she was so horrified by their cruelty while she was filming elsewhere, such as when The Man Who Knew Too Much was being made in Morocco. She also carried her love of animals into her everyday life. In addition to caring for up to 30 dogs at once at her estate in the Carmel Valley, Doris had a special kitchen created specifically for cooking for her pets, showing them the same love and consideration that she showed her family. It was 1995. When Doris launched World Spay Day, a global initiative to promote spaying and neutering as a means of addressing issues of animal overpopulation and lowering the number of abandoned animals. Her global influence on animal welfare was confirmed by the campaign's quick growth and eventual recognition in more than 70 nations. Long after Doris had retired from the entertainment industry, the DDAF continued her enduring legacy of compassion and advocacy by expanding emergency aid funds for animal rescue organizations, senior pet adoption programs, and low-cost veterinary clinics under her direction. Conversely, Doris had already distanced herself from public life in her latter years, although she continued to be a fierce supporter of her charity. She continued to support animal rights laws and awareness initiatives while living practically at home in Carmel and spending time with her pets. On her 97th birthday in 2019, she said a heartfelt public thank you to all of her followers for supporting her foundation and its efforts, rather than discussing her professional or personal accomplishments. In a way, Doris Day's legacy endures as much via her music and movies as it does through the lives of the many animals she did assist in rescuing and preserving. Doris Day's only child, Terry Melcher, was a talented and significant music producer who influenced the sound of 1960s rock, according to the talented son, Haunted by Darkness. Doris was the primary caregiver for Terry, who was born on February 8, 1942, particularly after she fled her violent first marriage. He made a name for himself in the music business as a young adult, creating the hits Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn for well-known artists like the Byrds. He also produced the Beach Boys' 1988 late career success, Kokomo, which became their first #1 record in 22 years. He also worked with Paul Revere and the Raiders. Terry's life took a dark turn in the late 1960s, despite his achievements. Terry met cult leader and wannabe musician Charles Manson through Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson. After hearing Manson's songs, Terry declined to sign him, despite Manson's optimism that Terry would assist him get a record deal. The denial apparently infuriated Manson. Terry and his girlfriend, actress Candice Bergen, were renting a home at 150 Cielo Drive in Los Angeles at the time. Terry left the residence soon after, fearing Manson would be unpredictable. When members of the Manson family turned their murderous wrath on Tate and 4 other people on August 9, 1969, that same house would become notorious as the scene of the Sharon Tate slayings. The majority of people believe that Manson started the carnage as payback for Terry Melcher's tossing him over. It is still one of the most terrifying what-ifs in Hollywood history, even though there is no concrete evidence that Terry was the actual victim of the murder. According to the article, I can say it has left deep-seated psychological scars on Terry. He reportedly spent a considerable amount of time following the incident living in fear and worry. Terry continued to thrive in music despite the faint shadows of evil that came so close to his own life. He finally collaborated with his mother once more, creating songs that would later appear on Doris Day's posthumous compositions on her 2011 album, My Heart. Doris and he had a complex but intimate connection, particularly during her troubled marriage to Martin Melcher. Melanoma claimed Terry's life in 2004 at the age of 62. Doris was crushed by this loss. She referred to him as the love of her life in subsequent interviews. In addition to being a producer with a wealth of talent, he is forever changed by one of the most infamous crimes in American history throughout the 20th century. Now made even more complicated and depressing by Doris Day's family's background. Fatherhood is a healing experience for Doris Day's grandson. The only grandchild of movie icon Doris Day, Ryan Melcher, received his first kid in March 2024, marking a heartwarming and hopeful new chapter in his life. On March 3, Ryan and his spouse, Brittany Melcher, officially shared the happy news of the birth of their son, Teddy. Ryan referenced his late father, Terry Melcher, the accomplished music producer and Doris Day's only child, in a poignant message that read, "Papa would be so proud." Teddy's entrance was not only a significant personal event but also the continuation of a complicated family history that had included both heartbreak and success. Ryan's heartfelt ode to his father emphasizes the close relationship he still has with him. Ryan has publicly expressed his respect for his father's musical contributions and his close relationship with his well-known grandmother, even though Terry passed away from melanoma in 2004. The birth of his kid seems to be a time of healing, a metaphorical bridge between previous and future generations of a family once shattered by celebrity, miscommunication, and tragedy, even though Ryan and Doris had grown distant in the years after Terry's death. Following Doris' death in 2019, Ryan and Doris Day's estrangement came to the attention of the public. Ryan claimed that he had not seen Doris in 14 years and that he learned of her passing on Facebook rather than through a personal call or family member. Ryan claimed that Bob Bascara, Doris' longtime manager, kept them apart and erected physical and mental barriers around Doris' Carmel mansion. Even if there is still unresolved sadness at that time, Ryan is looking forward to fatherhood and the opportunity to leave his child a more connected and balanced legacy free from the complications that have already tainted his family's past. Ryan is now a prosperous real estate agent in Carmel, California, and his new life places a strong emphasis on stability, family, and introspection. Teddy's birth is a silent homage to the generations who came before him, even if he was never able to present his kid to Doris Day. Seemed to have found meaning and serenity in his newfound happiness as a father, completing a tale replete with separation, rebirth, and, in the end, love. Ryan's path to parenthood also serves as an example of a broader generational shift in which recovery from early trauma is actively sought for rather than assumed. Ryan has emphasized emotional transparency and breaking cycles in interviews as values he wants to instill in his son. He once remarked, "Legacies are not what you get. It's what you decide to keep and what you decide to discard." Fatherhood brought Ryan serenity, but there is much more to his grandmother's story than meets the eye. The Untold Tale. Doris Day was perceived by the public as flawless, singing and smiling, and illuminating screens with a beauty that is almost ethereal. Behind that picture, however, was a woman who had suffered greatly from financial treachery, terrible relationships, years of mental health issues, and emotional loneliness. Early in life, she endured severe suffering, including emotional abandonment in her second marriage, domestic abuse from her first husband, and ultimately, dishonesty from her third, who embezzled and mishandled her wealth. Only much later did these struggles, which had been concealed throughout her years of fame, become apparent, exposing a reality that contrasted with her glamorous on-screen presence. Nonetheless, her tenacity was evident. Even in the face of sorrow, like when she recorded Secret Love the day after a dispute with her husband or when she learned of her brother's passing while on tour, Doris managed to transform her suffering into moving performances. Love in Secret. This was recorded in a single take while Doris was clearly distraught, startling everyone in the studio. It went on to become an Oscar-winning smash and a later anthem for the LGBTQ+ community. These unguarded moments of vulnerability resulted in some of her most famous pieces, connecting with audiences in ways that went beyond the meticulously manicured persona Hollywood had created for her. Doris returned to her Carmel Valley ranch, where she lived with her true passion, the animals, and virtually disappeared from the public eye in her final decades. She reportedly maintained a close-knit inner network of people she trusted, shunned public honors, and did a few interviews. Despite being meant to be calm, this seclusion sometimes caused conflict and misunderstanding, especially for her grandson Ryan Melcher, who was not allowed to visit her following the death of his father. His 2019 admission that he learned of Doris's passing via Facebook offered a fresh viewpoint on the emotional distance and secrecy that marked her final years. We are challenged to look behind the facade of stardom and recognize the whole humanity of icons by Ryan's story and the little-known details of Doris Day's life. These facts do not diminish Doris' legacy. It has been enhanced. She survived. A woman who brought joy, laughter, and beauty to the world while enduring personal storms. Her story reminds us that emotion and silence can go hand in hand, and that stories of immense courage, hidden grief, and unwavering hope may be found behind the most beloved faces. Other cultural analysts have added to this complex depiction by pointing out how Doris Day's carefully crafted public persona reflected the decade's notions of femininity. And the cost of maintaining that ideal became the representation of the ideal woman in America throughout the post-war era. Healthy, kind, modest, and domesticated. Molly Haskell, a film historian, famously called Day a tough cookie in ruffles, pointing out that her on-screen innocence often belied a steely ferocity. Her true life mirrored this contradiction, with her apparent positivity masking a career of survival. Day is not only a star of her time, but also an unspoken symbol of what many women of her generation endured behind closed doors, as discussions about mental illness, domestic abuse, and emotional labor have evolved over time, and her personal struggles have become even more relevant to modern audiences. Thank you for viewing. If this tale surprised you as much as it did us, please like it and leave a comment with your opinions. For more untold tales behind the headlines, click the subscribe button. Don't leave yet. To learn more about a Hollywood legend you believed you knew, click on the next video that appears on your screen.